Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Atomic Podcast. I'm super excited and honored to have Ed Heinbockel on the call today. Really, one of the leaders in a applied quantum services, but really more about thinking through how we can solve some of the larger problems using quantum compute, annealing, and some other aspects. I'm fascinated in my conversations with Ed. One, because he's a visionary, but two, because he's very grounded in how we can use quantum today in logistics, in trustworthy AI, and some other areas in which quantum we can see some real benefit, not only in the areas of I'll say specific applications, but I think more widely in society. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ed. Give some background, and I'm happy to have you here. Welcome.
Rodney, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and an honor. And thank you for providing a forum for an open dialogue across a range of subjects that are all near and dear to my heart, quantum being certainly one of them, Gen AI being another, and sort of coming out of what I guess one could describe as analytics or advanced analytics, where I've spent a good portion of my career. I've been a technology guy since '85. And never looked back, really. I mean, that's all I've done. First in the area of PC games. In the '80s, I worked for a company called Sierra Online, and then in the '90s, I had my own company called Tsunami Media. Late '90s, I was contacted by the FBI and asked if I was going to respond to a broad agency announcement. I didn't know what it was. I did, got our first contract, sold the entertainment company, and stood up a company called Visual Purple. I still have that, doing mission critical training sims, mostly for the government and for operations like commercial nuclear plants. And in 2015, my partner and I, we spun out, David Osby, we spun out SavantX, and really the goal of applying, I'll call it interesting analytics capabilities to hard problem sets in the real world. And that was this advanced analytics focus for SavantX. And really that's what got us rolling in 2015. And along the way, we set up a research center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we've drawn some wonderful talent out of the labs there on the quantum side and also on the data science side as well. And that's really what we've really developed some interesting core competencies across quantum and data science, and applying those to the real world in meaningful and valuable ways. We don't do research for the sake of doing research. While that is fun, we're really all about applied research, and that's been our focus. We've been working in the quantum world since, oh gosh, now 6 years. And we started out, really at the time, we started out trying to understand how a D-wave annealer works. And we become pretty competent working that machine, that hardware, and applying it in the real world in an operational basis, 2 shifts a day, this sort of thing. And along the way, we become more adroit at understanding and applying some of our talents in the area of gated machines. And not that we didn't want to roll with gated machines initially, but the hardware just wasn't mature enough to do anything that you could actually run in the real world and make a difference. So we're big on optimization, whether it's on an annealer, which has been the weapon of choice, and then as the ion Qs of the world come on with more and more usable qubits, then we can do more and more usable things, and we can do optimization on that hardware as well. And I would suggest that many of the touch points out there in industry, across any industry, is really about optimization to begin with. And that's where we can really move the needle and where great value can be generated. But anyway, I'm a technology guy, but I know just enough to be dangerous. So that's why I have a really great team that keeps me on the straight and narrow. But I'm the guy that gets to ask. I'm the guy that's like, why can't we do this? And then of course they roll their eyes, and then there's a lot of formulas go up on the board and they explain why they can't do it. And I said, yeah, but why don't we try it? So I'm just a pain in the butt for these guys. That's really
Excellent, excellent. No, you're moving things forward. And I want to, just for our audience for sure, is when you talk about gated or annealing, maybe give a sort of overview of some of the differences there in quantum that people can sort of hold on to.
yes. I think to give a little backdrop, quantum computing is going to, for what, 15 years or longer, quantum computing was just 2 years out, 2 years out, 2 years out for a long time, right? And I would also say that we internally we refer to quantum computing as programmable science experiments. That's how we look at it, because they're very finicky. And the D wave, it's funny. They've been around the longest. They certainly have a track record of innovation, and they've been focused on the annealer. And the purist out there will look at the D wave and say, "Well, that's not a real quantum computer," and which always puzzles me because it is a quantum computer, but it's a much simpler quantum computer in that instead of a 3D gated model, it's 2D or 1D, and you're limited really to running optimization problems on there. But that's okay if you can look across a problem set or a process or some measure of complexity of processes and be able to identify discrete processes and then optimize those. It's kind of the whack-a-mole approach to optimization. I'll optimize this one. Great. Now, these are a problem now because this one's so efficient. So you just keep, scaffolding it up. And guess what? A D-Wave works great for that, but it is limited. I mean, we're still early on in terms of the total number of, essentially usable qubits. You look at the D-Wave, they have the 5,000, they call the Advantage 5,000. They've got their new Advantage 2 1,200 qubits, which are a better quality qubit. There's more connectivity. It doesn't go nutso or decohere as fast as the other ones. And so you can do more work on it. And those are still, it's not 1,200 qubits you have access that you can readily use. It's literally down, if you can get 40 or 50 to work, that's great. And that's a very small subset. But,
Hey, Ed, I have a quick question before I forget. It's just
yeah,
the question is, so I'm an entrepreneur, a data scientist. I'm going out and I have some what I consider to be some pretty high compute problems that I need to solve for. Um, and I have NVIDIA on one side. I have D-Wave annealing on the other side. I can get some, 100s, and I can build out some really great servers and some compute, GPU compute, or I can go the D-Wave annealing process. Why would I go one way or the other? Now, you're probably going to say it's the problem you're trying to solve. I understand, but in terms of actual compute horsepower and the ability to get through and sort of supercharge a parallel process, what is it that one gives versus the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me answer it by saying that I'll give you a use case. So at Port of LA, where we implemented our first quantum process in production, 2 shifts a day, 6 days a week kind of thing. What we were doing was one process out of many that our Hone engine was basically making calls to. So think about a port. They're moving containers around. This one, 1.5 million containers a year. And the idea is you need to efficiently offload them from a ship. You need to put them in the yard. You need to do it in a thoughtful manner. So you minimize, it all gets down to minimize the number of times you have to touch and move a container. Because every time you move a container, it's expensive. So if you can get a container in and out of there, which is 2, maybe 3 touches, as opposed to 5 or 6, it's a huge savings. And so one discrete process, we had a pull down menu of processes that we identified as good candidates for quantum. And we took the one that we thought would be most useful initially. And we took the pointing trucks would come in, and then which truck would go to which crane to be loaded. And these big, what they call RTG, rubber tire gantry cranes, are moving back and forth across these rows. Trucks would come in, and then we would look at here's an example to answer your question directly. So if you have 30 trucks in queue, that's a 30 factorial problem. If you're going to run that on a supercomputer HPC, it literally would take you run the numbers, it would take you weeks or months. And we were able to run it on the D wave, full cycle time of 15 seconds. That's a really good example of needing a compute done in a sufficient amount of time so it actually has utility in the real world. And it was cheap to do it. Hitting the D wave, the process is done in 200ths of a second on the actual chip, but just the cycle time hitting the APIs and coming back to you. That's still really good. But just to kind of circle back to the gated machines for a minute, everybody talks about those, and you can do a lot more things with them. It's not an area of my expertise because I'm so practical. It's like, to be honest with you, all we worry about is how do we define optimization, areas of efficiencies that we can enjoy through optimization. And that's how we approach the world, because we know we can do it on the D wave extremely well. And now we know we can do it on IonQ and others on these gated machines using something called QAOA. It's just kind of an overlay process. But the gated machines for the future, they are the holy grail, right? And deservedly so. They're kind of, I think of it as moving to a 3D sort of chip. From an engineering standpoint, I have no idea how they're going to accomplish it. It seems incredibly daunting to me and my team how they're going to really scale this up. But these are a lot of bright people working this problem really hard. They have been, and they're committed to it, and they will succeed. And I don't know if it's going to be a year from now or 6 years or 10 years on the gated machines at scale. But IBM has their roadmap they're executing on. IonQ has theirs, and others. So they're going to get there, and that's going to open up a whole realm of possibilities, whether it's looking at protein folding or you name it. There's just some really cool stuff they're going to be doing with them.
And maybe just a little further on that, when you say possibilities, what actually opens up in that more dimensional approach that gated applies to? Is it that it's not just faster compute?
It's not just faster compute. It's being able to, that we think of these things as, the nerds among us think of these things as what they call MP hard problems. So essentially problems that are basically not solvable in time frames that have any value. Literally some of these problems, the age of the universe to solve them without quantum. It's that sort of chasm, right? So with gated machines, and I'll just be a real upfront with you, I do not normally allow myself the luxury to think about where that can go. And it's more indicative of our pragmatic approach to these things, because all we care about is what we can solve today and what is on the horizon that we can have confidence in terms of a capability that's coming online. Like take an example with IonQ. There are 36 what they call AQs. It's basically a good quality qubit, and they're looking at going 60, I think, by 2025. Doesn't sound like much, but if you look at 35, I mean, going to 60, it's a huge difference in terms of the compute capabilities. But for gated in general, if I allow myself the luxury to think through these things, I think there are just immense opportunities in AI. I think we have only, right now we're basically working with these large stochastic models, LLMs, large language models, and they're basically, prediction engines. They're predicting the next token. That's all they're doing in a manner that's based on the patterns that they've learned, looking at massive amounts of data and looking at it many different ways. I think that the gated machines are going to give us the ability to do things we've never thought possible. And I think we're going to be able to look at knowledge repositories. I'm careful not to call them databases or data sets, but knowledge repositories, and think about these repositories in higher dimensional manners. And I know that sounds very woo-woo-y, but to me, that's where some of this incredible value, I think, will be realized. As we think about, like I use example of protein folding, and there's a host of other applications for gated that I haven't really spent time, focusing on, but I think about gated, what can gated do for us in the area of AI? Because that's an area that we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort in.
Yeah, I know. I was just giving a keynote at a biotech conference, and when I asked the panel um, where they saw AI being applied and potentially AGI, it's they all like unanimously said drug discovery, which is basically molecular dynamics, being able to calculate extremely quickly those dynamics to come up with candidates that could be sustainable drug candidates. But more importantly, really understanding deeply those, uh, those dynamics and capturing those. And I think molecular dynamics, as well as atomistic simulation, are areas in which I think this dimensional approach will just explode discovery.
I do
I say
too.
explode in a good way.
Yeah,
I mean, let's just open it up.
I think you strip all this away. I think it's being able to. I think gated quantum computers. And by the way, I would also footnote this that there's not a. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario where you just have a quantum computer doing magic. It's always going to be hybrid. You're going to have it surrounded by classical processes and classical computers, right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And even NVIDIA's talking about that now, right? So, but to your point, here's how I think about it. I think about it of complexity versus complicated systems. So complicated systems are we can readily identify discrete processes and do whatever we need to do with those discrete processes to improve upon them, right? And with some predictability, we can pull out a discrete process and we know what the knock-on effects probably will be or should be, or we can test for it. Then you move into this whole realm of complexity, and that's where I think 3D, if you will, quantum computing, gate model computers, that's where they will shine because they can look through this lattice of complexity and understand the relationships. And then you can go ahead and you can start playing with those relationships, right? You can have these systems start to simulate these very complex systems, and that's where the magic happens. And that's why I think about it from an AI, from a thinking, reasoning standpoint. And not a lot of, I haven't run across the papers yet, but there are some out there that sort of speak to this at some levels out in the future. But I think you're going to see a lot of work in that area as these come on, where there's enough qubits to do these kinds of things, and we're going to have to explore. And I'll give you a quick example, which fascinates me on large language models. There's a paper that came out of MIT last year. Is it Techmar? Fellow's name, and they did a study on an LLM, and just kind of sort of layperson summarize it. To me, it was really cool. They essentially did linear regression probes into a large language model. They determined that the model was actually creating spatial and temporal world representations within the model. And it's like, how in the heck could it do that? Because I think there's a lot, even though I sort of dismiss these models as being, just prediction engines, there's stuff happening in there that we really don't understand yet,
Very
which is
much so. And I
fascinating.
think it's really one of the areas that I think we're just sort of riffing on this. I got you going and gated, so sorry. You are in the future, near future, by the way. So I'm taking you out of your current state. But I think, Ed, what's important is um, some of the problems that will require much more dimensional reasoning um, are problems that are being discussed. Um, and it's around what we call AI safety on kind of a lower level, but it's also on a more higher level, I think, and more important level. It's areas of artificial empathy. It's areas of how do we actually build algorithms that aren't sociopathic when they start to form this convergence, which is actually somewhat going on based on just what you said as well. We don't really understand, and yet there's emergence happening in some of these models. And so when we think of AI alignment, trying to align so that as algorithms across industry, across server farms begin to emerge with new features, if not new models within the models, new forms of reasoning, that we're actually prepared to create a safer world, not just by regulatory capture, but actually from an engineering standpoint. And I think some of the gated approaches or more dimensional approaches will, I think, assist in this area. I'm working in this area, so I would love to have a gated approaches already there, because we just, but they are dimensional problems when we think of AI alignment there. And you really can't just go from top down or from regulatory in to solve them. Although some of that works, you really have to go from ground level up. And I know you're in this space to some degree with AI safety and Seeker. So I'm not sure exactly how you're seeing quantum play into Seeker. So maybe that's a good parlay into that.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. And you've also brought up an interesting subject that's near and dear to my heart in terms of safety and alignment. I can talk to that, but let me just kind of buttress that to answer your second question or point, and that is, so we're building quantum AGI, and we're a small company, but we're executing on this. We have a number of first of quantum in the real world, real applications, and we have a really good understanding of how to apply quantum and how to, I think it's the key is be able to understand and express the problem. Before you can apply anything, you have to understand what the problem is, right? And then you have to figure out ways and approaches to solve those problems, right? And what we're doing with AGI, our approach to AGI is to take we have a product called Seeker, which is Chat GPT on your own data, essentially. And we look at these models, whether it's anything from Anthropic or any large language model as a reasoning engine. And then we look at the value as being able to apply your content with that reasoning engine. And it's called a RAG model. And we didn't even know they called them RAG models until last summer. It stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So it's a search engine that you bolt up to a reasoning engine, a large language model. And then you have transparency. So we have, when you get that nice conversational response after you issue a prompt to it, to Seeker, you know exactly where it came from within the corpus that you're accessing. And if you think about it, if you take that, what Seeker is today, and you move that forward in time to more of an AGI model. Well, what's an AGI? AGI is artificial general intelligence. There's many definitions. It keeps changing. I just think of it simply as it's smarter than the average bear. The average bear has an IQ in the US as of 2019 of 97. The smartest country in the planet in 2019 was Hong Kong at 106. And the country with the lowest IQ, and I don't quite understand this except maybe it's hypoxia, is Nepal at 51, which is hard to believe. It's functionally illiterate. But we're kind of at that Nepalese level now, moving to US and then beyond. And then, these curves go like this, right? But how do you get there with quantum? Our approach is, it's kind of a divide and conquer, and it's not a scale. It's not a brute force. It's not we're going to do the equivalent of Chat GPT 6 and we're going to spend $500 million to train a model. No. What we're looking at is making massive repositories of knowledge quickly accessible to our system, because you have to get to the right data rapidly. You have to reason against it and provide a response. Then you take it a couple of steps further, and there's a host of quantum processes to really implement and to accelerate that data access, which is very critical. And there are a number of other processes that are great candidates for quantum. And then there's also, if you think about the systems today, are systems that they sit there. Once they're trained, then they just sit there waiting for the next prompt and then doing what they call inferencing, right? And then they come back with an answer, and then they sit there for the next prompt, essentially. And there's variations on this, but essentially they're kind of a passive system. So I think for AGI to be, to learn, it has to be active. It has to learn on what it's doing, what it's not doing, and it has to think about what it hasn't done, and it has to think about other scenarios that it could have responded with or thought about. So we have this whole notion of what we call quantum dreaming, which is really a very heavy duty quantum process that is persistent even after you're interchanged with at any given point. So
in Seeker, at least on your website, you use the phrase trustworthy AI. Where does trustworthy come in to the scenario you just painted?
So we have full. So when you engage with Seeker and you issue a prompt, you get a response. You can click and go to a tab that will give you every snippet from within all the documents that it referenced that you directed at. Here's a folder with however many documents, and then you chat against that folder of documents or a document or whatever or file. It gives you back exactly where that it gives you every snippet that was used to construct that nice conversational response. So you have a full audit trail. You can see what was used to construct that response. Number one is called the Explain tab. And then the Inspect tab is pretty cool. We have a deep research tool that is essentially, we've done a lot of work over the years training analysts, building simulations to train analysts. And there's a whole host of tools they use. And one of them is called link analysis. And you've already seen this on the TV crime shows where, the detectives trying to figure out who done it, and they'll have a bulletin board or a wall with a bunch of pictures and string between the pictures. So we essentially do that automagically. We generate all the strongest signals, whether they're phrases, terms, or concepts, and we express that strength in terms of the size of a node, and then we show the connectivity with lines, and we bake in a lot of information visually, so then you can navigate that. And you can click on anything you're interested in, then a down select just to those nodes that are connected. So it's a way to go deeper, and then you can see these relationships. Then you can go back over to your chat, and then armed with some information you've teased out of interrogating that space, you can perhaps refine or change the direction of where you're going with that chat that you never would have otherwise. So it's a deep research tool. Most people won't use it, but we have law enforcement using Seeker now, and they find that extremely helpful.
And how do they find it helpful? In what ways?
Because you end up finding relationships that are not readily apparent, and without seeing the connectivity of the strongest signals associated with that chat, there's no way you would know, right? So just a real quick example, we're working with the sheriff's department, and it was a cold case. Working with this one detective, and that was sort of the test bed of using Seeker to see what we could do with this cold case. And it was several thousand pages of content, right? And it's been a cold case since 1997. And what's really cool about it is just going through interrogations, using the Inspect tab and informing where you go with that chat. They were able to come to the point where they've reopened that cold case. So, all these years later, which is kind of cool.
So, I mean, in this case, when we think of just going back to that kind of phrase, trustworthy AI, it's really trustworthy AI inspection. In a sense, it's giving you tools so that you can validate and then further explore your own data and finding those connections, as you mentioned, but also finding very loose connections that may be highly valuable. And so that's super interesting. I think in the area of trustworthy AI, what's so difficult for people is that they've experienced over the last year and a half, 2 years, a sort of fire hose aspect of using the large language models in which they're getting, what is typically called hallucinations or unverified data or any kinds of numbers. So many cases out there about this. But the point is that since it's so fast and they're prompting on a daily or hourly or minute by minute level, the idea of trustworthy in real time becomes pretty elusive. Because what are you going to hit? How are you going to check that in real time as you're going through? So I'm just wondering. I don't mean to take us back to the dimensional horizon, of quantum, but the idea I see for quantum here is having trustworthy AI applied in real time to those kinds of relationships between between RAGs and LLMs, generative AI. We could talk about generative AI. I know there's very little provenance there, right? You can't take the breadcrumbs back to the original source with generative AI as well, because so many data transformations. But I do see quantum stepping in to really help individual users, if not companies, understand a bit of where they sit on the scale of, trust, or low trust, high trust, relevancy, and so forth. I mean, how do you see that picture unfolding?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So first off, it's difficult for us to see how LLMs at scale can be trustworthy. I think you alluded to that. And
Right.
then that's where rags have an edge. And there's probably going to be all sorts of, you know, variations on a theme here, right? But with the RAG, and you're forcing the LLM to just look at the data you're sending over, which is what we endeavor to do. And then there's some other stuff we're doing, which is pretty cool. But then the idea is that at any point in that conversation, it's the trust but verify. I want to verify. At any point, you can verify where it took the data to give that nice response, and that's really important. And otherwise, if you look at, oh, the context windows are getting, doesn't really matter, but you dump in some content into a context window and you chat against it, and you don't have, there doesn't exist that I'm aware of systems, other than rags or like what we're doing with Seeker, where you can actually validate or verify how that response was built and constructed. And there's this whole area in the military space called test and evaluation, and they're having a real problem with this right now because their systems have always been deterministic. They're basically logic trees, and certain things execute. A missile goes off, and with some assurance, they know that missile is going to go where they want it to go, right? They have all these, but when you move into the squishiness of Gen AI, yeah, these black boxes. The black boxes are so complicated we can't explain them anymore. And the only way out of that I can see is to build black boxes to understand the black boxes. That's that simple. I just haven't figured out another way of doing that. There was something else if I could come back, because I don't want to miss this point because it was a good question you had around alignment and safety. And we look at these models. We have our own model we trained up. We took a number of open source models and fine tuned and I don't know, I'll make up a word, de-lobotomized them. The safety and alignment side of this, well, think of it this way. So models, you start out with a bunch of data, right? Basically, they scrape the internet, and then they train these models up. So, it's very expensive, and most of the cost is energy. And then they will, even as part of that process, they have to annotate, right? So the data that they're training on, humans have to go through and basically do some feature extraction, right, and classification. And the models, they do this training, and then they have humans do this reinforcement learning thing, and all this stuff happens. And then you get a model that's pretty darn good usually. And then they come in and say, okay, well, we do not want people to know how to build a bomb. So now we're going to start putting some guardrails and doing some alignment and grounding. They have all these different terminologies, but basically they tell the model, don't answer a question about bombs. Okay. And don't do this, don't do that. So if you think about it, if you have a kid that you want the kid to learn as much as possible, so you expose that child to as much stimuli as possible, and books and knowledge and experiences, and that the child builds a world model, and then you're constantly over the kid saying, no, 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 don't do this, no, no, no. So pretty soon that kid's world goes like this. And then you start influencing, and you say, don't use those words, don't do this, don't do that. Everything is a no, no, no. You literally, in the child's mind, all of a sudden you're starting to do thought control. And when you do thought control, you essentially start doing a lobotomy at some level. And the same thing that we see happens in the models. So you go into this hardcore alignment, and these models start going wacko. That's a very technical term. and so we take a very different approach. And this works especially in the government space and for law enforcement. And I've been in these meetings with law enforcement. I've asked them this question directly. I said, we have our own model. that we have taken the guardrails off, and it'll, if you ask it how to build a bomb, it will tell you how to build a bomb. If you ask it how to disable a drone or kill a drone, it will tell you how to kill a drone. If you go to ChatGPT and say, how do I kill a drone? It says, oh, it's a large language model. We're not allowed to cause harm, you know. And no, they want the model, they want the unplugged model. And that's really important to them. That's important in any military application too. But I think the lesson to be learned is it's hard for me not to wonder if maybe we're being a little bit too much of a nanny approach to this. I can foist an argument, and I do on a regular basis, that I think we're better off keeping these models open and keeping them more pure. Let them respond however they're going to respond, and then push the responsibility to the human. I know it's not what most people think, but a lot of money and effort and time and energy is being spent to keep us safe from these models, when in reality, I think we need to do a better job, you know, as a society, in terms of raising people and educating people and making people responsible for their own actions. By making these models safe, we are not going to make us safe. I guarantee you that.
Super interesting. And you know, when I give talks, I often mention right along the same line, which is we're entering a whole new realm of personal responsibility that we actually have not really experienced before. You know, and in other words, responsibility on an individual decision with all the technologies at one's disposal. On a good side, that story looks like it's called, you know, a unicorn of one. That sort of bumper sticker. But on the other is, you know, someone that can cause mass harm on a bad story, you know, so a single agent catastrophe. I would say I'm not super close, but relatively close to the mis and disinformation um, crowd. And I think that mis and disinformation with the new technologies, particularly with generative AI, is a big concern. And the question is, are we going to build safer models or put constraints on them, or build better human beings, or build a society? And I think the jury is out on all of those, because I think the idea of society fracturing because of mis and particularly disinformation, is a real reality, Ed. And so, how do we stop that with telling, you know, a small group in, you know, some other country? I'll just say I have very particular places I could point my target, but some other countries, including our own, don't do that, when their whole agenda is to do that, whatever that is. I don't know. It's a huge problem we're circling around right now. It's a societal, individual responsibility and technical one, but we're giving definitely stronger, more powerful tools in the hands of everyone.
Indeed, I would suggest that we're already living that challenge with social media.
Yes, I agree.
And in fact, I would say that that is much more dangerous than what we're sort of losing our minds over in terms of alignment and safety with these large language models.
Yeah, I'll give you just a quick story, like a 10-second story. My daughter woke up from a nightmare, came over and said, "Daddy, can I get in bed?" She's 10 years old. I said, "Sure." She goes, "Daddy, can I ask you a question?" I said, "What?" She goes, "Is AI evil?" I think it is. Is AI evil? So we're talking about rainbows and ponies and, you know, Lion King. And so it's a generation that's thinking across these things in a way that you and I did not. And so it's not that she's just ingesting evil, because I'm an optimist. That's not what goes on in our household. But the idea that there is harm around the corner is something that is part of her rainbows and ponies. And so, how do we educate and also elevate um, the next generations, so that they use these tools responsibly and for the good? I don't have an answer. It's just something I think about every day. Um, and I do think it comes to what we do, meaning what we do collectively and individually. Um, I just don't think we have the structures yet to think about how to do good in the current sort of societal situation. I think we want to. and there are other people that actually don't want to be part of this conversation. They actually don't care about good. That I know as well. So I don't have an answer. We're in this kind of discussion now, but I don't have an answer, but I do know personal responsibility needs to elevate. Let me just say one more thing, is that conversations around decision bias do come up in this area. Is that if we are to be better at using these tools, whether it's, gated quantum, annealing, large language models, generative AI, then we first need to kind of check our biases and have, the analytic capabilities to understand the kind of decision biases we're bringing into models, but also bringing into our perspectives. And I think that training, as one person in the intelligence community told me, he goes, there's only one group of people that get that training, and that's the intelligence services. We are grilled on bias, on decision bias, all day long. Now, you might know this quite well, but he was super clear that that kind of critical thinking around decision bias, human decision bias, was something that should be in every school, not just for certain analysts.
Absolutely. Critical thinking in general, and logic fallacies. There's a whole pull-down menu of what they train against. And it's not just the agency, it's you can go the Air Force and
Yeah.
the analysts there. So it's a common theme. And it is it's conspicuous by its absence within higher education in this country, if not the world. It's a really good point. There's just to kind of tag on, you make some interesting points, but to kind of tag on to it, back to the story, your daughter, and the evil concern, it's kind of a normal child thing to like, what's going to happen behind, what's going to happen in the dark sort of thing. And also, I think it's emblematic of our, as the human species, where we anthropomorphize pretty much everything we can, right? And we see that with these models early on before there was even released, with Google, et cetera. And that'll continue, and those perceptions will become closer and closer to reality as these systems become more and more powerful. At some point, they'll probably intersect. And I know people that are very concerned about these systems, actually possessing entities at some point, right? And that's a whole nother discussion that I think is fertile territory for debate. I think it's fascinating. But near term, I look at this as we're in an AI/AGI arms race, and whether it's nation states, we can talk about China, we can talk about Russia, all right, are the two, and there's some others out there that are working hard in less obvious ways. And of course, in the U.S., we have OpenAI, which is essentially a division of Microsoft, right? And then we have Microsoft working on this, and we have Google, and we have Anthropic, right? These big foundational models. And I think that the chance for evil resides much more with those large corporations imbuing agendas that are not readily apparent to the populace, that could have devastating consequences for us individually and as a nation. That to me is more of a concern. Near term.
Yeah, and if you see this sort of tension between open source and IP protected tools, techniques for LLMs, then that becomes super real. And the idea that OpenAI is kind of super funny at this point.
It is ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, sort of from my daughter to you, to me, and to all of us, is that we are in this moment of tension, the arms race. We're in this tension of IP versus open, this really fast generative, innovative space in which compute is very, very important. And yet, who holds the keys to that compute is often, except in your case and some other companies, often in the larger tech companies. They sort of have the data, they have the compute. So, kind of goes to you and to what you're working on is a great effort, because you've done it with a relatively small team, and yet you've been able to leverage, high potential compute. And I think that's a great lesson for entrepreneurs to see that, and to know they can form these partnerships in a way that is very applied. And I think that's a great Great lesson. I was really impressed when I was going through, the Peer 300. Now, you did talk about that earlier,
Hmm.
but the idea of how much data you were handling, um, and I know you were mentioning it before, but I'm just wondering kind of what the future of that is, like the next year, like what your roadmap looks like. Is it just more of logistic control? Um, is it more containers? Is that the scale, or is there other features that you're scaling up to deliver that efficiency?
We have, we kind of think of it as air, sea, and land, right? And what's cool about the Hone engine we built, it's a very flexible engine, and it's, except for that quantum process I described earlier of appointing trucks to cranes, it is, well, there's some others now too, but it's classical compute. It's good old-fashioned data science applied at scale. To give you some parameters around that, on a average day at the port, we'll replicate out 2 to 7 billion rows of data and then process that overnight. So the system, we call it dynamic terminal forecasting. The system was a little smarter first shift of the morning than it was the last shift of the day prior. And so it keeps getting smarter and smarter. And those are kind of approaches that have been around for a long time. But I think the teams did a really good job of implementing that. And so you can take that and you can apply it to trucking, you can apply it to any form of, of transportation. And we tend to think about, the areas that are really ripe for optimization are networks, right? And to look at these graphs. And that's where quantum computers, and especially, it's a natural for the annealers like D-Wave to basically do optimizations, graph optimizations. It really works well. It's incredible what you can do with them. So I see that as the future. And in fact, I just had a discussion yesterday with some folks on this, and they're out of the trucking industry, and they're like, they're funny. They're like, it's a bunch of old white guys have all these big trucking industries, and there are all these legacy systems, and they run. And they're like, we know we should invest in new technology, but we've been doing this way for decades. And so it's going to be interesting to see as sort of the new guard comes on and start applying these technologies. They're going to realize some wonderful gains. But it's funny because they actually admitted, like, yeah, we're the old white guys, and we don't understand this technology. We've been doing it this way, but yeah, we should move at some point to efficiencies. But the technology
Are
is there.
they? Is there a fear factor that to move into these technologies is not a gain but a loss for them?
I
Loss of
think it's
jobs, for example.
No, I think it's more, that's a good question. No, I don't think it's that. I think it's more of the inertia, overcoming the inertia of the way they've been doing it, even knowing that if they make the investment, it will pay great dividends for them. It's kind of the Warren Buffett thing too. I don't understand this technology, so I'm not going to invest in it. Right? He doesn't invest in anything he doesn't understand, which I think that's a great model, right? It's worked very well for him. And I get it. I get it. The old guard kinds of regimes, maybe that's the wrong word, but management of these, these many decades old operations, whether it's trucking or anything. Um, they're making good money. They have a good business, and it's hard to kind of move to that next step, I think, for a lot of them.
And kind of getting close to wrap up here, I'm just wondering, do you have any advice on, other entrepreneurs moving into some similar spaces that you're in, thinking, foremost on applying quantum to problems, and maybe you can sort of maybe list or express some of the challenges and things not to do for people.
Well, we're gonna need a couple hours for that, but not to do. Yeah.
That's fine. I think just some would be great.
There's okay. Here's one thing I guess I could that should hopefully be helpful to folks. So, any hardware purveyor for quantum, what they tend to do is they tend to work really hard about, okay, we want to create tools to make it easy for people to use our hardware, right? That's the natural thing to do. And that's great. But what also happens, I think, oftentimes, and not in sort of a unplanned fashion, is by doing that, everything could look like a traveling sales traveling salesperson problem, right? TSP, or the knapsack problem. But the problem is many of the problems we find in the real world don't neatly fit into those constructs. So that's where you need to have some real, brainiac horsepower to apply and help better define really what it is you're solving, because they don't always neatly, drop in. That's one thing we've learned. And we tried using off-the-shelf stuff early on, and so this is never going to work. So we have a couple guys that literally had access to their own D-Wave at the lab for 5 years. So they understand the D-Wave like D-Wave, which is really cool. So what does that mean for us? It means we actually build our own Cubos and run them on the bare metal. And that's how we do all of our jobs. We don't use any off-the-shelf packages. We don't use any of the hybrid solvers. We run it right on the bare metal, and that gives us the control we need. And we actually create custom Cubos to solve the problems we're solving, and understanding and expressing those problems in ways that you can build a Cubo to solve the problem.
And did you find this is often in the literature about like environmental factors that can get in the way of your hardware, or is where the D wave lives been a problem?
Not for us. I mean, it's just a service. It's just an API call for us.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just an, and that, I have to tell you that the D-Wave the uptime was like 99.9%. It was surprisingly good for us. I didn't know what to expect when we went operational with it. And I think we're seeing the same thing on Ion. We have more experience with Ion Q on the gated than others, but I'm sure IBM has a very high uptime. Uh, it's nice about like the Ion Q, which I'm more familiar with than the IBM segment, but they're doing room temperature, and their approach is an interesting approach that I have a lot of respect for, because they have a roadmap and they keep executing on time or a little ahead of time in that roadmap, which I really think is great. And I love it that it's a room temperature device too. I'll also
Yeah.
throw in, there's a company which is really kind of fascinating. I don't understand the physics of it yet, and I haven't really dug into it, but we've been doing some benchmarking with them. It's a company called Light Solver out of Israel, and they have something called it's not quantum, it's called an LPU, for a laser processing unit. And we've done some runs, and the results have been phenomenally good, surprisingly good. So I think they have a lot of potential as they work to productize that and make it available. And I don't know how their business model is going to flush out, but they're sharp people and doing some really interesting work. I love seeing stuff like that.
One question around digital twins, because it seemed that you have some fairly deep experience in digital twins. And so wanted to ask, how it's being applied. I believe it's been applied in your home product, but perhaps more widely. So I think there's a lot of excitement, has been, in digital twins. I've worked in that arena myself. But to actually see digital twins produce real results and real calculations that are, close to perfect, or relatively, I think people really are interested in that. So how are you using digital twins? How did you develop it?
Yeah, we've a little bit of our background on the company, the SIM company I mentioned, Visual Purple. We built a lot of SIMs over the years for clients, and in the non-government space, we built accurate digital twins of nuclear power plants, as an example. And we've done, using those digital twins, we created security training. And so security forces could train up in VR or on flat screens in multiplayer manners. But the accuracy was so good, they were able to actually test what they call fields of fire, so they could actually change configurations in terms of outpost and other assets based on the accuracy of it, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of in our DNA. So when we moved it, on the SavantX side, the port was a really great example, because essentially they dumped when we started the process to build Hone, we built it in 18 months. And, it started out, first thing you got to do is the data dive, right? And they gave us a bunch of data, and we started looking at the data, and that's where the black magic of data science comes in, trying to look at the data, tease out relationships and, feature extraction and all that. and everybody has their theory going into it. We were then informed. We had a theory that certain things were probably important processes that we should be focusing on, and the operators had their theories, and we just went ahead and let the data tell us. And then from there, and of course, the data told us is a different story than either party thought, us or the operators. And then what we did is we took that and we took that data and we created an accurate simulation of the operations, daily of the port, down to where you could see the cranes working and the trucks moving around, literally that level of granularity. And then from there, then we could start doing A/B testing, right? So now we're going to apply some cool data science here. What if we optimize this process? Then what falls down next? Back to that whack-a-mole thing. So you do that. You don't do that manually. You do that in an automated fashion over millions and millions of runs to tease up these optimizations. And then you get basically you do balancing. And then once you're happy with the balancing, then you do a final review over this with the client and make sure that we're all on the same page and that we haven't missed anything and that they're comfortable. And then you get the okay. Then you go ahead and you build out the application to reflect that. So, and it's especially important in like a port, operating port. No one's going to shut a port down for us to try our theories out. It just ain't going to happen. And but this is a really effective way we've applied this in our work with the Air Force. We're on phase 2 working with Air Mobility Command. We're optimizing the flights around the planet with quantum, which is really cool. And we were able to take the D-Wave and we're able to parse the problem down so that, and then compute a number of optimizations and reassemble and compute sort of the Uber optimization. But it's a network of 400 plus airports, 5,600 plus flights a week, and be able to, we took 15 years of data, built a digital twin, and went through that process I just described to you, and we're able to tease out some rather amazing increases in efficiency. So now we're refining those algorithms and the QBOs, and then it'll be operationalized in the next phase as an API, so they can actually push a button and do a global network optimization anytime they want.
And this is a little mind blowing, the scope of or I should say, the reach of what you're doing, Ed. So yeah, and I think you're a great lesson in terms of a lot of people talking about quantum, but you're doing it. And in real world, but also impactful areas in the real world. And I think it's a great lesson. I want to deeply thank you for this discussion and also for you just being generous with your time and your experience. I think it's wonderful.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and thank you for that. It was fun. I love these questions and observations and to riff off of it because we're living in probably we have a son who's 20, and after going through what all these kids have gone through the last few years, it's been pretty hard on kids in general. And like I tell them, we're very blessed to live in this time of such wonderful opportunity. This is one of the most exciting times to live in. We're just at the precipice. We're just at the beginning.
I agree, Ed, very much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for opening your doors to us, and I look forward to more discussions.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Rodney.
Take care. Bye bye.